precisely, and that is why your question is so spot on, why this triggers such a huge response. Truly a huge response in terms of solidarity all across Europe. In Spain, as you rightfully mentioned. In all the other countries, including the Netherlands. And you see that citizens and governments alike are willing to do their utmost in terms of helping out with weapons, in terms of helping out with humanitarian aid, but also in terms of very concrete things like packaging stuff at school that they can then use and send to Ukraine or do that in a neighborhood or do that through churches. You can see that in the willingness and the desire to harbor refugees themselves, as many have done all across Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, in Northern Europe and in Southern Europe. And I think that is a huge sign of not only politicians and governments, but also our people showing what this conflict is all about.
Thank you, Wopke. Kyriakos, you are an example of a leader that sometimes you have to take tough decisions, and it has been the case in council meetings with this new situation created by the invasion of Russia of Ukraine. We are talking today, I'm telling you, not about policies, but about what were your sentiments when you heard about, for example, the invasion of Ukraine, and how do you decide to take, action in Greece that has been so much also welcomed by all the other European countries, please?
Well, Tono, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Look, I still remember, when the news broke that Russia had actually invaded Ukraine. The truth was that although we all had access to the relevant intelligence, not many of us thought that this would actually happen. Maybe it was wishful thinking, or maybe we did not believe that Putin would behave in much to realize how shocking it was to be faced with a war on our continent, something which was unthinkable. And the founders of this party and the founders of the European Union fought so hard in order to ensure that territorial integrity in Europe would never be violated through the force of arms. So this is indeed a new world we're facing. And as far as Greece is concerned, although we are a country which is relatively close to the Russian people because of our geography and because of the tradition of our Orthodox Church, it was very, very obvious to me from the very beginning that we needed to make the right choice, and the right choice was to support Ukraine in any way possible. We took the decision to send military equipment. We explained why we did that, not just as a matter of principle, to support a country that is under attack, but also to send a clear signal to anyone who can think that the borders can be redrawn through force, that they will be faced with an overwhelming response. And this is exactly what we've managed to do in Europe. Andrei is here with us, and Roberta, we still remember the first meetings in the Council, the first days we were still discussing as to whether we should sanction Putin himself. And then 2 days later, all the decisions were taken, and now we've agreed the 6th package of sanctions, which is the toughest measures we've ever imposed upon any country. And our strength here is our unity. And we have to explain to our people why we're doing this. We have to explain to our people that, yes, there will be short-term pain, but if we were not to stand up to a bully, if we were not to support Ukraine, all the values we have built our political careers fighting for would essentially be threatened. So decision at the end of the day, Tono, was obvious and easy.
Thank you, Kyriakos. We have also now with us the Prime Minister of Croatia, Andrej Plenković. Warm welcome also. Andrej, you come from a country that's next also to, let's say, interesting area for us Europeans, which is the Balkans. How did you live the beginning of the invasion of Russia of Ukraine from that perspective, from that region of Europe?
Thank you very much, Tono. Sorry for being a little bit late, but you started a bit earlier. Kyriakos and myself, having been at the European Council, were planning to be here at 6:30. And thanks to our hosts for organizing the Congress of EPP. It's so nice to see you all again. I would like to, first of all, greet our Ukrainian colleagues and friends and sister party members who are here, to share with them a lot of solidarity and respect and support that we have all been having for Ukraine in this absolutely unbelievable context that has started on the 24th of February. How did we feel? You know, there was a lot of cynicism at the beginning of this aggression, violating all the principles of international law and the international system that we all share. There was a comment that wars in Europe do not start on Wednesdays. So apparently it was okay to start on Thursday, the 24th. I immediately drew a parallel with the 2008 and the Beijing Summer Olympic Games and the Olympic truce, and then Georgia. Now 2022 Winter Olympic Games, again in Beijing, again end of the Olympic truce and aggression against Ukraine. It is true that for the country who was also a victim of aggression 30 and more years ago, of the regime of Slobodan Milosevic of Serbia, it was very quickly almost a reflex reaction by the Croatian authorities, Croatian government, and also Croatian people to stand with and stand by Ukraine and Ukrainians. Therefore, as a Prime Minister, when I learned what was happening early in the morning of the 24th, I immediately convened the government session. We immediately passed conclusions on support to Ukraine. Then we all went to Brussels for the first European Council where President Zelensky addressed us. And I have to admire the courage and the hardship that the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian military, Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian leadership have gone through over the last 100 days. They have demonstrated how one loves his own country. They have demonstrated how one fights for the freedom and the values. And I think we, as the Union, but also as the EPP, have been really consistent. And this is one of the values of our political family. We never had any doubt. We weren't hesitating. We knew who was right and who was wrong from the start. And I think we should remain as such in the course of our taking of positions and concrete actions to support Ukraine. All of us were in Ukraine basically as leaders in the last couple of months. I was there even before in December. And I think coming from Croatia, we understand very quickly what's going on, and we know how difficult it is.
I will come back to Kyriakos because I was thinking your country has suffered aggression from Turkey several times. How have you dealt with that? I know, Greeks know, but it will be good for all of us to listen, you know, how with moderation but also with firmness you have reacted to numerous provocations.
The truth is, Tono, you don't choose your neighbors, but you're destined by geography to live with them. And it's, of course, much better to live in peace and solve your differences through the only commonly accepted framework, which is that of international law and good neighborly relations. This is what we've always tried to do. And this has always been my approach since I became Prime Minister with President Erdogan. Unfortunately, that approach has not always been reciprocal. We were faced, you remember well, in March 2020 with the first attempt to weaponize migrants on a systematic and on a large scale. We defended the European border. At the time, the leadership of Europe, the President of the Council, the late President of the Parliament, David Sassoli, the President of the Commission stood by us to send a signal that the borders of Europe have to be defended and that desperate people cannot be weaponized in such a brazen manner. And since we've had good periods, now we're again faced with a period of tension. But we will do what we've always done, make our case through rational arguments, make our case to our allies, and I'm very thankful for the support we've always received at the European Council. We probably will debate this issue again in June, should the Turkish aggression continue. Thank you for the support we've received, Roberta, by the European Parliament. It means a lot to us because what we cannot tolerate is a new version of historical revisionism, fantasies of lost empires and a projection of power that is not in line with a rules-based international order. So I think this case that we make allows us to have lots of allies in Europe, in the United States. The last thing we need today, Tono, is another source of instability on NATO's southeastern flank. I'm sure maybe some people in Russia would be very happy if that were to happen, but we're going to make sure we're not going to allow it. But we also send a very clear signal that we will not compromise when it comes to our sovereignty and our sovereign rights. That is why, even before the Ukrainian crisis, we spent more, as has Croatia, to strengthen our armed forces, to make sure that we have a credible deterrent capability. We're a force for peace. We are a defensive power. But we want to send a very clear signal that any notion of threatening our sovereignty will be punished in a very severe manner. So complicated neighborhood, Tono, to live in, but on the other hand, very grateful to be facing these challenges as a member of the European family.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyriakos. I'm afraid I'm going to have to be a little bit rude now. People that are standing behind, please leave the room or sit. Please take your seats or go. Yes, please. We have two prime ministers here. We have the President of the European Parliament and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. At least we can show some respect. Right. Thank you. It's part of the job description. Sorry for that. Roberta, you come from the Mediterranean like me. Do you see any threats to our democracy coming? We have spoken about the Wagner Group in Africa, about the belt, Chinese belt, and the activities that are going down there. Do you see any kind of threat for us and our democracies building up or not?
Thank you, Tono. So I'll split the question in two. First of all, do I see a threat to democracy? And this is an answer that we should all ask ourselves the question. Are we doing enough as politicians, as elected representatives, as people fighting for democracy in our countries and in our everyday job in order to push back against the threat of EU skepticism, of populism, of extremist rhetoric, but also of not tapping into enough with the frustration of some voters who feel far away from us? And I think that's a question that we should ask ourselves, especially today, when we emerge from a very difficult 2 years of a pandemic, where people have been at home. Whole generations of students have lost the possibility, as our host told us this morning, of going to school and living a life where discussions take place in person, but now everything has been, for 2 years, dealt with alone behind the screen, that it became so much easier to tap into or be influenced by extremist rhetoric and narrative on our screens. What have we done as a Europe, and what can we do now as a party to push back against that growing? I think that that is an existential question that we should all, whether our parties are in government or in opposition, fight against, especially in the run-up of the elections in 2024, which will be a test as to how we can encapsulate once again the hope and the vision for Europe in those generations that have not yet voted. As regards what is happening in our neighborhood, so I come from a country right and bang in the middle of the Mediterranean, very difficult neighborhood, big challenges traditionally, historical challenges, violence, autocracies, doing away with elections because it was convenient, corruption, politicians thinking they're above the law, that the rules don't apply to them. That has not changed. It still continues to be a systemic problem in our neighborhood. What can we do about it? We are now not only facing a potential, let's say, additional influx of migration because of economic instability in a post-pandemic scenario, but now that we have an autocrat that has invaded another country, that has decided to break all sorts of rules that have been on paper for decades because of the reason why we wanted the European Union to be built, that is threatening famine and millions of people in the southern continents to feel in a position that they cannot pay for their food anymore. And this is because the supply chains are blocked, because there is no possibility of importation, that raw materials are not arriving, and that even for those countries that are in a position to grow their own food, they do not have the resources to do so. So what we are facing because of the decision of one autocrat is that you have millions of people whose livelihoods is threatened. What is our answer? Yesterday in the European Council with Kyriakos and Andrei, in the part where I was present, this was discussed. What do we do? Do we allow it once again to happen at the cost of so-called peace? Do we allow for face saving of a person because it is not in our interest or in our comfort to look away? Or do we really today, as a political family, as a European Union, say this is unacceptable, no more? I would go for the latter. Because if Putin did not stop in 2008, he did not stop in 2015, do you think he will stop now? No, he won't. Unless we answer in the strongest, most united, most coordinated fashion. I am proud of what we have done, of the leadership that the European Union has shown, the European Commission has shown, our prime ministers have shown in making sure that we are coordinated, effective, and quick. That is, quick is not, let's say, a word or an adjective we usually use for the European Union, and also, least of all, the institution that I am a member of. But we managed. We managed. Because we had the political will, and our citizens asked us to respond to an aggression that for my generation had not lived through it. And I would like to make sure that our children don't live through it and look at us and say, what did you do in 2022? Just like our children are already looking at us and saying, what did you do in 2015? So I would say that the threat is real, but our answers are in our hands because we have the tools to combat them.
Thank you. Wopke, are we facing a new Cold War? Do we have to choose between the United States and China? I know my choice, but what is the role of Europe in all this? What is your vision about it?
Well, thank you. And I think what your question shows, and also what Roberta just said, and with which I very much agree, shows us that there is a world before and after the invasion. And if you look at what is there on the wall, and I think we can all read it, we stand with you, we stand with Europe, we stand with Belarus, we stand with freedom, Ukraine, and democracy. Friends, this is not just about Ukraine. And this war is the most extreme thing that we have seen recently from Russia. But let's also accept that we have been too naive in the decades that are behind us. We have thought that the peace dividend would always be there. We have been lured into a false sense of security. And I don't want to sound depressed about the world, but I do want to be realistic. We are in this for the long run. This conflict, this war will take longer, but also the values like freedom, values like democracy, values like human rights, values that are inherently belonging to us as an EPP, those values are not being taken for granted all across the world. And we have thought that it would only be a matter of time until others outside of Europe would accept these as the best recipe for their citizens. But that is not the case. That is not the case. Other countries, first and foremost Russia, but Russia is not alone, are actively challenging these values that, in my view, should be the centerpiece of the 21st century. And it is up to us, in this specific war, but also beyond that, to defend and protect these values, not only for our citizens in the European Union, but also for all those citizens across the globe who actually have the exact same rights to democracy, have the exact same rights to freedom, have the exact same rights to all those things that we as European citizens often take for granted. So we have to stand up, we have to live up to that promise and defend what is most dear to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Wopke. Andrei, you have come with Kyriakos and we're very grateful that you have come straight from the Council. Is there anything you can tell us from the Council?
In terms of internal debate?
Maybe something secret.
Well, I think that the entire reflections and the decisions that we have been taking do take place in a global context which is critical for us as a party to understand. We are in the moment of rivalry between authoritarian regimes and democracies. We are at the moment with a different view on the concept of the way the world is governed. On the cooperative manner, the one that we are trying to advocate, and the conflictual ones that is happening right now. And in such a posture, what do we do as the European Union? What did we do as the European Council today? Roberta mentioned the speed. I think there are two tremendous velocities that we should acknowledge in the context, in the post-context of Russian aggression against Ukraine. One is the speed with which the European Union has reacted, or the speed with which Western democracies, as our panel says, have reacted. This has been unprecedented. And second is the overall international mobilization for Ukraine. I'm speaking this as someone who comes from a country who was also a victim of aggression, but in the beginning of the 90s, not that we didn't see such a mobilization of the international community, we had to defend ourselves under the United Nations embargo and sanctions on import of arms. So what I see here is a tremendous aid to Ukraine. This was part of our debate, which you asked Tono yesterday and today, and there is a very strong commitment. There was an agreement on the package of sanctions, sixth package of sanctions in 100 days. This has been an incredible achievement. I think that the consequences for Russia will be felt because we can't accept that the war and the war campaign is financed by selling fuels, selling fossil fuels, selling oil, selling gas, and thus profiting and being able to finance the military machine. And I think this unity of the European Council yet again has shown that here we can do a lot when we are committed, where we have a clear political will, clear guidance, and the overall historic responsibility. Because this is a moment when no one can afford to be silent. No one can afford to neglect what's going on. We should speak up, stand for our values, stand behind Ukraine, and act accordingly, whether it was political engagement, economic assistance, financial assistance, humanitarian support, military assistance, or the overall special treatment that Ukraine has now in its relationship with Europe. I don't recall anybody else who had had so many special dedicated programs, measures and support as Ukraine has had over the past 4 months. Of course, it is due that is like that, and I think we should keep up this effort and continue. This is the message I would say was the most important from the European Council, including, of course, all the other issues, security, food, not to have a protracted crisis, for instance, in the Northern Africa or the Sub-Saharan Africa with a lack of food that might happen, or the overall issue that Kyriakos just mentioned, and that is strengthening our defense and military capabilities. We as the European Union, whether we are part of NATO, whether we should become part of NATO, should strengthen and pool our resources. And for instance, my country this year has the biggest defense budget ever, and we will continue in a sustainable manner to invest in our military capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. Energy, energy, energy. It seems that now our democracy is depending on energy. Do we have alternative sources? I know that something is going on in the south in the Mediterranean towards Greece, Israel, Cyprus, and others. What's going on, Kyriakos? Is there our alternative sources?
We are faced with a short-term problem and a medium to long-term challenge. As Europe, we have been at the forefront of setting the pace for decarbonizing our economies. And even before the Ukrainian crisis, a big part of our next generation EU package was directed towards investments into making our economies greener, and in the process, not just reduce our CO2 emissions, but also make our continent more energy independent. The second dimension was sometimes lost in the general debate about climate change. But after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, we understand how urgent it is to ensure our own energy independence. So now, at the Council, we've tasked the Commission to finalize the detail of what we call the Repower EU Plan, which is essentially repurposing the unallocated loans from the RRF and channel them again towards projects that will make us more energy independent and will pave our way towards reducing our emissions. In Greece, we are by nature blessed with solar and wind energy, and we know that now the cheapest energy that we can produce in Europe is from wind and from the sun. That was not the case unfortunately, when our energy markets were designed. So coming back to the short-term challenge, Tono, all our governments, there's not a single colleague at the Council who is not struggling today with high energy prices. There's only that much we can do in terms of national subsidies. That's why we've been advocating for European-wide solutions and to take a very close look at how the energy market itself is designed. The truth is we're paying very high prices for gas in Europe, Tono, now, much higher than anybody else in the world. And this is a distortion that we need to address. We first of all need to recognize that it is a distortion and that it needs some sort of intervention. And we also link our electricity prices to the gas prices. So the marginal unit which determines the price of electricity now is gas, whereas in the past it was renewables. So the system is not properly designed to address these challenges. That's why it is very important. It's a technical discussion, Tono, and we also want the European Parliament on board in this discussion to really look at the design of our electricity market and to understand that right now we're the victims of a distortion. We're paying more money to Russia than we should. We're essentially contributing towards Russia making more money from gas, and at the same time we're imposing very high energy prices on our citizens. And my concern is that if we don't do this quickly, there's a risk here, and the risk is that the support in our societies will start to erode, because people will look at their monthly gas bills or their monthly electricity bills, and then they will realize that we're paying a higher price than we had anticipated. That is why, on top of the national initiatives, we've taken quite a few in Greece to alleviate, as has Croatia. All countries are to a certain extent spending money to subsidize in one way or another energy bills. It is imperative that we also need a short-term intervention. I have no doubt that we will move towards making ourselves more independent. In Greece, for example, we are planning to construct an electricity cable that will connect Greece to Egypt and to Cyprus and to Israel. For example, from Egypt, we can import very cheap electricity. So these are the types of projects that take time. But until these projects develop, let us not lose sight of the fact, and I'm sure this is also an issue that is discussed at the European Parliament, that we need more urgent interventions to deal with the short-term problem of high energy prices. This is an urgent issue that needs to be addressed, not just at the national, but also at the European level.
Roberta, do you think that we are ready in Europe from a defense point of view for the challenges that are happening in the world today? Should we do more?
I think that the time has come after many years of, again, looking away, or perhaps lack of willingness to do things together for a proper defense union. Keeping in mind certain specificities of number of member states in terms of neutrality, etc. But we have seen over the past weeks and months the pooling in of resources that we never thought possible, or we never wanted to think possible. And I think this is also something that we should look back over the past years in the way we handled the pandemic, where we realized that more Europe was suddenly a good thing. We spent years saying, no, let's leave it at member state level, this is a federalistic thing. But during the pandemic, the day after, when we realized that the instinct was to close borders, the instinct was to look inwards and blame the externalities, until we realized that without each other we could not have vaccines for everyone. We needed to rely on each other for medical equipment, medical attention, and today we're in a position to say we are ready to create a proper European health union. So I think we are in a very crucial moment where, in the context of talking about the conference on the future of Europe, and we can discuss at length about whether we open the treaty or not. The position of the Parliament is very clear in that we want to have a convention, but we also need to see what tools we already have. When we see the EPF, how it has been used, how it has been well used, when we thought that we would not be able to use it in the current structure, when we see the way that member states have answered so quickly to President Zelensky and his colleagues' requests, then we see that defense-wise we have the capacity to act, and with speed. But also, Kyriakos, we have had this conversation earlier about what we mean by our external borders and the possibility to actually strengthen those external borders through the agency we have, which is a union response to a question that has been pushed by our political family for many years, because we have also not to forget that after the March 2020 incident at the external borders, which got a strong response and once again called for the securitarization through defense means of those borders, we had the hybrid attack by Belarus on our Baltic countries and on Poland. This is only a few months ago. Time goes so fast, and let me make it very clear. This is no time to try, as Putin would want, for us to look away from Belarus, because that is a country that has been fighting an autocracy and a dictator for decades. And that is exactly what Putin would want us to do, to look away. So my answer would be yes, absolutely. We are not well equipped. We need to be more. We need to have a true and proper defense union. We should not be afraid to see where the gaps are and be ready to fill them with solutions at the European level. But now I will flip the argument over. We have had many solutions at our fingertips. We have had tools in our hands that we could have used with majority voting, etc., but we didn't. When the word solidarity was not used, when it could have been used with countries that needed it. And I think we should also look a little bit internally over what happened over the past 10, 15 years, that it is sometimes not only about inventing or creating new tools, but about how we use those that we already have. And I'd like to mention one anecdote which I wanted to bring back earlier. We are a party that has always focused very much on the regions. And I'm sorry, I'm seeing Apostolos in front of me. And I need to recognize, and we need to recognize, as a pro-European party and group of parties, that without our activity at the regional level, what we have seen in Europe would not have happened. Would not have happened. And I see this because we have so many mayors, also among you, so many colleagues that are active on the local level, that to open their homes, that organized the possibility of hundreds of thousands of refugees, of Ukrainians traveling. That was one experience I will never forget as I was boarding the train to Kiev, that there was a group of refugees boarding a train to Prague on the same platform on the other side. And I saw it happening with my own eyes, and I said, this is Europe in action. So we have the tools, we can do more, we have shown our human side. I think now we also need to show our defense potential.
Thank you, Roberta. Good news. Tomorrow we will vote an amendment that will give our Committee of the Regions, all our regions and cities, more representation in this Congress. Thanks to Apostolos and Olgert. So, mission accomplished. So, Roberta and I, we are a little bit like in the Parliament side. Let's go to the Council side. About defense. Do you agree with Roberta? Do you think that we have to do more? Are we on the right path? The special situation with NATO. I'm a fan of NATO. I'm sure that all of you also. But how do you see defense for the next 10 years, which is a crucial now question for all of us? Now, no particular order, if anyone wants to react. Because next question will be, next question will be if Ukraine is going to be a member of the European Union, so I will throw it also if anyone wants to take it. Okay? Sorry, Kyriakos.
I think we need to spend more, and we need to do it in a smarter way. I think that's something we all agree on, and even countries which were way under the 2% threshold, your Prime Minister has committed. He just told us that you've made a big announcement in terms of pushing your military budget. So there's no doubt that we need to spend more, and of course we need to do it in a way that is fiscally sustainable. We will have the discussion regarding the new parameters of the Growth and Stability Pact, and I know that there are many of us thinking about various exceptions to what should count or should not count towards our deficits. But I think if there's one category of spending that, especially after Ukraine, needs to be in a completely separate category, it is the most existential role that the state has to play, which is to defend its citizens. So I would very much advocate for us thinking constructively about how to treat defense spending. But spending at the national level is clearly not enough. we've always see these presentations of the number, the multiplicity of weapon systems that we have in Europe. So there's no doubt in my mind that we need more joint procurement and more streamlining when it comes to purchasing weapon systems. We need to buy more European. The truth is that 60% of the spending is currently non-European spending, which means we need competitive systems, which means we probably need more scale. We probably need more consolidation. And if we do that in a joint manner, then interoperability becomes a much easier question to answer. Let me give you a joint example between us and Croatia. We both bought the same type of aircraft. We both decided to buy French Rafale jets. So what did we do? We bought European, and we bought the similar type. Maybe had we thought it before, we could have even done some sort of joint procurement initiative. We never know, it'll come. But this is so much easier in terms of servicing, in terms of making sure that our forces, also within NATO, are more streamlined and are much interoperable. Last observation, this is not competing with NATO. The stronger the European component is within NATO, the more leverage we will have within NATO, but the more capabilities we will have, should we choose at the European level at some point to act on our own, to be able to undertake that task without always relying on transatlantic support.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree more. And maybe, Tono, I could share one of my experiences of the last couple of months. As is always the case in politics and in Europe, there is never a shortage of meetings. And I had a range of meetings with my NATO colleagues, as well as with my European colleagues. And the interesting thing is that already, if you look at the member states, there is of course huge overlap. But in the last couple of months, also something else became possible, and that very much links to what Roberta was saying before. What was impossible only a couple of months ago is now completely acceptable to everyone. Because in these NATO meetings, some of our European friends were present most of the time. And then our EU meetings, there was the Secretary General of NATO, and our Canadian and American friends were present there as well. And the big task that we have in front of us is making sure that Europe truly stands on two legs, on NATO and on the EU for geopolitics. And of course, defense is primarily the objective of NATO. It is the cornerstone for many of the European countries. But if you think about the future, and you think about the geopolitical position of the European Union, there is a lot of work that we have to do. We are an economic superpower, and we have to make sure we translate that capability into geopolitical savviness. And we haven't done enough, and there's much more that we can do. And let me close on by saying that I would very much welcome, I think as we would all do, our two friends that are already part of the European Union, Finland and Sweden, in NATO as well, because it would further show how seamlessly these two organizations can, will, and should work together. Thank you.
If I may just add a few points, and the key one is already something I said in the previous intervention, that our defense spending in this year is highest ever. And it's also due to the fact that we, as Kyriakos mentioned, just like Greece, decided to buy the European technology, the Rafale multi-combat planes of the latest generation that France actually has at the moment, and we shall be enhancing thus our capabilities to the extent that our military has never had before. But what I think is critical is to mention the strategic autonomy. We are facing challenges in terms of energy, but we are fully aware that it's not any more affordable to go along the road of sort of silent European disarmament. This was mentioned in the debate today during the debate on security and defense at the European Council. And I think everybody has been aware of this. We can't be sleepwalkers if someone else is discreetly very active. That means that we need to strengthen our capabilities, combine the investments which we do at a national level with the various European funds that we have created for such a purpose, and also invest in our technological and industry base, not forgetting the small and medium-sized enterprises, especially the industry in the smaller member states, because we clearly differ here. The big countries, they have a very large, gigantic, compared to some of us, their defense industry, but I think we should strike the right balance in this respect. And also, as Wopke mentioned, this NATO EU interaction. A couple of years ago, when I was living and working in Brussels, there was always a comment, do they actually ever meet, the two organizations, as if Platz Schumann and Zaventem are so far away from each other. And they are not, and they should not be. And therefore, this compatibility and complementarity of the two organizations has really been clear in the last couple of months more than ever before. And therefore, I think there is a very clear consensus. We shall all be strengthening our defense capabilities individually, jointly, pooling resources and making better use of what we actually spend for defense. Croatia is now above 2% of our GDP in terms of defense spending, and out of this 2%, more than 30% are allocated for modernization. This is the right answer in the right time.
Thank you, Andrei. And now comes the tricky question. Ukraine, Moldova. Do you see them as future members of the European Union? No deadlines. No deadlines. Future members of the European Union.
We will have this debate in a month. And I can tell you it is not going to be an easy one, because we already sense that there are diverging views within the Council. I will just make one point. First of all, pointing out that we're expecting the avis, the opinion of the Commission. But if indeed there is a world before and a world after the 24th of February, that needs to be taken into consideration in our thinking and in terms of how open we want to be to extend candidate stature to these countries. On the other hand, we should not forget about the Western Balkans. This is a topic that is very close to our heart. We need to make sure that we do not send a signal that the order of procession is significantly derailed, and the first priority we have there is to make sure that we resolve the outstanding issue between Bulgaria and North Macedonia, so that we can start proper negotiations between North Macedonia and Albania. So I think we need to recognize the singularity of what happened and the desperation of Ukraine and the need for them to be anchored within the European architecture, while not forgetting also about the fact that there are other countries in the process that are also eagerly awaiting to make their own progress based on their own merit.
Okay.
When I was in Kyiv in December, I signed a bilateral declaration with President Zelensky supporting Ukraine's European path. And as the latest member of the European Union in terms of stage in the organization, having joined only on the 1st of July 2013, we would be the last country to say no to anyone. So our policy in general is to support, first of all, our neighbors in Southeast Europe in their attempts to fulfill the criteria and become members of the European Union. And I'm happy that Kyriakos has mentioned the Balkans. I mention here in particular two countries which have not yet been granted a candidate status. One is Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the other is Kosovo. Kosovo is not recognized by 5 member states of the European Union, and that poses a serious obstacle. But Bosnia and Herzegovina certainly should not be the last wagon in the train towards the European Union. And in this respect, I think that we should, as the EPP, try to fine-tune some of the elements which are standing on this way, not only the 14 conditions that the Commission has outlined towards Bosnia and Herzegovina a couple of years ago, but also to settle the basics. And the basics are major and elementary democratic rights of fair electoral system, of constitutional reform, and thus enable that all the three constituent peoples, the Bosniaks, the Croats, the Serbs, as well as all the others, feel well and comfortable in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And therefore, I appreciate the efforts after the European Council conclusions in March that the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, has undertaken in direct talks with the highest level of political leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina to come to a consensus to alter the electoral law, which is, in our view, inadequate because it doesn't end up with legitimate representatives in the institutions. And we shall continue to insist on this issue because we feel it is essential. On Ukraine, on Moldova, on Georgia, all three countries have applied for membership. We are waiting for the Commission's avis. The process is always the same. The country applies, the Council sends the dossier to the Commission. Commission, before writing the avis, sends the series of questions to the country that is aspiring to become a member, and then the answers come and are evaluated. So I think it will be very important what the European Commission will say on this membership application demands. It's an early stage of internal debate, but I sense it's not going to be easy. This is a far-fetching decision-making process. Some of the member states do look differently at the enlargement in general. Some of them look differently in different parts of Europe. Some of them look differently in the future concepts of how we should organize the European Union and its neighborhood. So I'm sure we are facing a very exciting and I would say uncertain debate of what will be the final decision. These are decisions taken by consensus, and that means that everybody has to be on board. So with all, I would say, allegiance towards the legitimate ambition, especially of Ukraine in this context, because I do understand the symbolical value of being granted a candidate status in the context that Ukraine finds itself now. The leadership expectations, but moreover, the expectations of the people, and also the peoples of Georgia and Moldova, who are also concerned on what will be their future. So we will have to find a very intelligent, and I would say hopefully as broad in terms of consensus decision in several weeks' time.
Maybe they will listen more to you, Ruth.
Thank you. And Tono, you were asking about the very long term, but I think it also reflects reality that my two colleagues here talk about the short run, because we really did enter a completely new phase in European history. Now, on the long run, and talking about Europe more in general, I think one of the most attractive things of our union, truly one of the most attractive things, is the fact that we are by nature inclusive. And that means that any country that is on European soil and that is both willing and able, is allowed to apply and is considered part of Europe and part of Europe's future. And then, of course, there is this short-term issue. And I think the reality is that it is very difficult for anyone who has talked to Zelensky or to my colleague Kuleba, and who knows that this country is literally fighting for its life, to say no to anything. And that also is the reason let's see whether that works.
People behind, could you please shut up and go? For once and at all, please. Thank you.
Thank you. A friend in need, it is very difficult to say no to. And that is precisely the reason why so many of us from the EPP family, from all our member states, have gone to great length, have done the unthinkable in providing Ukraine with weapons, in putting up very, very significant sanction packages, in helping out with harboring refugees, in helping out with humanitarian aid, and taking the very first steps in making sure that those responsible for war crimes are being put to justice. That is all that is needed. But at the same time, there is, of course, also this issue. And I think that what we have done so far is actually a wise step. As my two colleagues have said, the Commission is now looking into this matter very seriously, is taking into account all the various positions in the capitals, but also the geopolitical reality that we are facing, and that simply has changed. And I think it is up to us as leaders, as members of the EPP family, but also as foreign ministers and prime ministers, to whatever the Commission comes up with, take an open look at that, and then come to a quick and firm decision. Thank you.
Good. Roberta was here writing a lot of ideas, so Roberta.
I'm not sure I'm going to read out what I wrote on the paper, but I very much look forward to the next European Council. It is going to be a difficult one. Enlargement discussions are never easy. We can, of course, and we will, as a parliament, do our part after the Commission avis is published, but I will start from the principle, from experience of being one of 10 countries that was waiting for that crucial moment when the door was opened. And I'll never forget that feeling of welcome, that feeling of belonging after decades of struggle against whether it was lies, misinformation at the time, etc. And when we celebrated our entry into the European Union 18 years ago, one month ago, and in 2024 we will be celebrating our 20th anniversary of joining together with those 9 other countries, it will be a moment where we can look back and say, was that the greatest decision or not? And I can tell you resoundingly that whoever you will meet in those 10 countries, they will tell you, hell yes. Hell yes. Now, we are living, of course, in a specific situation where we have countries that have already applied. Some of them have shown their wish decades ago. Some countries who would like or have expressed a wish for them, we would also insist that the sanctions packages are implemented correctly and no gaps are left. But also that there is a population and there are countries that would like that door to remain open and that hope to be kept alive because they are literally fighting for their lives for it. And if we can manage at the next European Council, Andrei used the word intelligent, I agree fully, with those words that can continue to show that when we look at the European Union, it is not only economic decisions that define the territory or the external borders, but the fundamental principles which we all share, which our political family is founded on. I am convinced of this. The European Parliament has been already very clear with the largest majority we have ever seen, and this is not easy to get. Majorities all the way from the left to the right, with a resounding, if a country looks to Europe for protection, for peace, for liberty, for justice, let's not look away, let's not close that door.
Thank you, Roberta. And then a final question to all of you. This Congress is the starting point of the efforts of this party to confront the elections, European elections in 2024. In the meantime, there will be elections in some of our countries, but this political family will start, as from tomorrow, to focus on those European elections 2024. I would like to grab the opportunity that we have the privilege of these 4 speakers to ask them how they think we should address these elections, what would be the messages that we should give in 2024. I know it's still a long time, I know it is, but what is your sensation after all we are living? Roberta, you spoke last. I will give now a little bit of breath. Andrei.
Well, time is passing very fast, and it's already 3 years past the last European elections, and the next ones are in 2 years. What we have witnessed across the member states of the European Union, especially in the western part of Europe, we have seen that the EPP parties, members of our family, have been bitten from everywhere. If we are too politically correct, then we are labeled as being too centrish or leftish. If we are too conservative, we are attacked as backwards. This is a very difficult political situation for the European People's Party, the biggest European family in Europe. And I think our focus in the preparation of these elections should be exactly to avoid such scenarios. To demonstrate that we are the most reliable, the most serious, the most organized, and the most problem-solving oriented political family and the party organization. Because the times that we are living in are so challenging, so demanding. The new crises appear one after another, not literally that there is a pause between them, but they sort of blend with each other. For that, you can't trust the demagogical, I wouldn't even call them populist political parties. You can't trust those who are at the far pieces of the political spectrum in any of our countries, because they don't have the inclusive solutions. We do. And therefore, I think the fight is for each party of ours in its own country to demonstrate the values, the political ambitions, and the programs that we stand for, partly included in the program we shall be adopting and the declaration we shall be adopting tomorrow, but being prepared really to demonstrate again why the EPP has been the party that was predominantly constructing Europe. And therefore, this is our biggest challenge in next 2 years, challenge of the tomorrow elected leadership of the EPP, and we are willing from our side to provide more than an active contribution as we have been doing over the past years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Wopke.
Tono, you are asking for 2024, but I'm sure you know the saying that a week is a long time in politics. So it is not necessarily easy to give a decent answer to your question. But if I have to take a shot, my 50 cents of wisdom would probably be along the following lines. For us, the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. There are huge differences between our countries, between our parties, but there is one very important basket of things that unites us, that keeps us together. And that is the values that we share. Those are the values that should not be upheld in some of the countries, for some of the people, some of the time, but for all of our people in all of our countries, all of the time. And that is about human rights. That is about democracy. That is about standing up for freedom. That is about each and every of these values that the founders of the EPP have stood up for in the past. And I think if there's one unifying theme, then it's that theme that we should pursue. And frankly speaking, we are allowed, and we should actually be much, much more vocal about it. Thank you.
Kyriakos.
Before thinking about the 2024 elections, I first have to win my re-election in Greece in 2023. It's one of the important elections that will come up in the electoral calendar, including Spain, Poland. It is an opportunity before the 2024 elections to make sure that we increase our presence at the European Council, because the last electoral cycle has not been very kind to us. My personal experience in Greece is very much aligned with what Andrei said. At the end of the day, our job is to solve problems. And I would encourage us, while preserving the fundamental values of our party, Wopke spoke very eloquently about them, to also focus on the practical concerns of people today. And these are jobs, growth, health, education, and income inequality. We need to reach out to all of those who are disgruntled and convince them that the populists offer very easy and palatable solutions, but when they are elected into power, usually they make a huge mess out of it. This was very much the Greek experience, and I hope it will not be repeated in many other European countries. So a combination of focusing on our traditional values, what has made our European family so strong and so important in the history of the European Union, with a focus on cutting-edge problem solving and really innovatively public policy solutions, embracing the green transition, embracing digital, which is such a transformative tool in order to rebuild trust between governments and our citizens. These are some of the lessons that we need to take forward as we move into the 24 electoral cycle.
Thank you very much, Kyriakos. Roberta, you and I, we have faced 4 European elections. What is your messages? What are you expecting of the next ones?
Well, we are the ones who, in my case, will be a candidate in 2024, so I'll for the European elections, and it will be a very, very difficult one, but one that I think we can look back as having had a mandate which focused on what mattered. Sometimes I feel that we run elections with buzzwords that we don't even bother to translate. Big words, and then we question ourselves, but why didn't people vote for us? What happened? And I think that for a while we were almost afraid of not saying we were pro-European, and that we should be proud to be European and run a pro-European campaign. And by saying that we are pro-European means that we are addressing job inequalities. We are going to be addressing, we haven't mentioned mental health, a big consequence of the pandemic. We are going to have an audience of 88 million 15 to 29-year-olds who should be able to look at our political family as the one giving them the answers, as the one that is ambitious on climate, as the one that does not treat the environment and climate as though they were mutually exclusive. We've done that before. As one that we can look to Europe to create new jobs and solve problems. And ultimately, I think if we go into these elections with one message, that we can win. And I am convinced that we can win, and I'm convinced that the next European Parliament will be composed of an even larger European People's Party group membership in it.
Well, thank you very much to the 4 of you. I have been abusing your time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for sharing with us here in our confidential meeting of the EPP. And hope to listen to you soon. 4 of us, thank you very much on behalf of all of us. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you for all these words. It gives us hope for